Hello and welcome to this Q&A with the Fertility Alliance. Today we are joined by Clare Ettinghausen, who's the Director of Strategy and Corporate Affairs at the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, or HFEA. And Clare is going to answer some questions about the authority, about what it does and why it may be relevant to you as a patient. So Clare, what actually is the HFEA?
So we are the UK-wide regulator of all fertility treatment and human embryo research. So we were set up in 1991 by Parliament, and our job is to oversee everything that's happening in fertility treatment and human embryo research, whether it's in an NHS clinic, private clinic, whether it's in England, Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland. So we have this oversight function. We inspect and license all HFEA licensed fertility clinics, which we can talk a bit more about if that would be helpful. And we also have a duty to publish information, which we do so mostly on our website, but also through social media channels and talking to people. So we cover a whole range of things, but kind of we are there to assure patients about the safety of their treatment in fertility clinics.
And why was it actually set up in the first place?
So I think when the first IVF baby, Louise Brown, was born in 1978, it was considered, this newfangled science. People didn't, know what it was about. Was it safe? Could anyone sort of just carry it out? Did you have to have any special skills? And there was a lots of public debate, which eventually led into inquiry and eventually into the law that was passed, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Act. And I think what was decided then, which is really still true today, there's no other area of medicine that's involved in the creation of life. So for anyone having fertility treatment, if you're creating embryos and storing them or having them transferred, this is the potential for a future life. So there's lots of different people involved. There's the patient, a partner or a donor, the doctors, the scientists, the embryologists, the nurses. And for all those reasons, it was felt that this is an area that is separate from kind of everyday medicine. It's not the same as having an appendix removed or a hip replacement operation where you go in, you have your treatment, it's done. This is potentially lifelong consequences. And I think that's still true today. And the HFEA is seen as the world first regulator of fertility treatment. And there are many world firsts to our name. And we, even now, all these over 30 years on since we were set up, we frequently get inquiries from other countries who are looking to set up a regulator or to model some of the newer innovations that have happened in the UK and how the HFEA has ensured that those innovations can be introduced to the UK safely and under a well-regulated regime. I should say, I think regulation provides patients and clinic staff with a degree of perhaps comfort's not the right word, but a baseline that they can be sure that someone who's independent from a clinic and independent from patients is checking in, making sure that the law is being adhered to, and that patients are really at the heart of what is happening in fertility treatment in the UK.
Who actually makes the decisions at the HFEA?
So that's a really interesting question. So the HFEA is a kind of broad group of people. So we're all a mixture of people who've got medical or embryology backgrounds, lots of scientists, people who work with data. I'm someone who comes from a sort of more practical background, a regulatory background. And we all work to a board who are called the authority. So the authority is a board made up of 14 people. And they are appointed by the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. So adverts go out every few years when these appointments are up and people apply. There's an open competition and recommendations are made. And ultimately, they are appointed by the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. And they're a combination, again, of professional people. We've got professors of gynecology. We've got clinical geneticists. Very eminent scientists, but then we also have lay people, so people who've worked in patient support. We have other professionals like nurses and previously counsellors, a whole variety of people. They meet several times a year. We always have the meetings in public, so anyone can go on our website and watch them on Teams or on Zoom. And we publish all the papers that they discuss in public, and they're our board. They are the people who hold us, the staff, to account. So every few weeks we report to them, we show how much money we've spent on our performance indicators, looking at tracking all our key activities, so inspections, licensing, inquiries, what we're doing in the media. We report all of those things to them, and they can ask us for more information, or tell us we're doing things wrong, or other things. And then we also bring items to them for key decision. So we've done lots of work. As I said, our law was started in 1991. So last year and the year before, we did lots of work on what changes to the law could be taken place. We talked to the authority a lot about that. So it's really kind of key policy decisions, our strategy, our business plan, that sort of thing would be discussed with the authority. And then on a day-to-day basis, we've got a large group of inspectors. They have a system where each inspector has about 10 clinics each. And by law, we go into every clinic across the UK at least every 2 years. And that's a really good way of saying, however good a clinic is, we'll still be there every 2 years. Now, the next question is going to be, what happens if a clinic is not so good? And the answer is we may be in there every second week. So the law says at least every 2 years we inspect, but the truth is we have very regular oversight of HFEA licensed clinics. And where concerns are raised in any way, or we have concerns, we are in there much more often.
So is every clinic in the UK that offers any kind of fertility treatment a clinic that has to be licensed and registered with the HFEA?
So I think in 1991, when we were set up, the answer was yes. So there was NHS treatment and private treatment like there is now. You might go into a kind of small clinic where perhaps the most senior gynecologist, had started that clinic and owned it, or in the NHS, it was within a big NHS hospital. Now the system's changed quite a lot. Unfortunately, the vast majority of patients are paying for themselves. And although there are still lots of NHS clinics, there's lots of separate private clinics that may be part of bigger groups, owned by, having financial interests abroad. Those are all licensed clinics. I guess what has changed probably in the last 20 years, but particularly in the last 10, is the rise of other services where, for a patient or a member of the public, it's very hard to see, not only from their website, but even if you're there at these establishments, whether it is a clinic or not. So I'd say two things for anyone listening or watching. The first is on the HFEA website, you can find a list of licensed clinics. And every licensed clinic on the HFEA website, you can find lots of information. You can find out what other patients thought of the clinic. You can find out what our inspectors thought, and you can find out key data from the clinic. And if that is not on our website, then the clinic is not one licensed by the HFEA. And it's really confusing. It's really difficult to understand because not every type of fertility, but not every part of the fertility journey, if you like, has to take place in a clinic. So it may be that you go to an online service to discuss what the different treatment options are. It may be you go somewhere else for a blood test and somewhere else for a scan. And all these places might either be, the information given could be online. The others obviously are in person, but they might be much closer to where you live or where you work. But the treatment in terms of egg collection, embryo creation, embryo transfer, those types of treatments must take place in a licensed clinic. So if you are looking at a website or an app, or you see, you pass a building somewhere and it says fertility clinic, I think it's worth asking, what can I do here? What services do you offer? And is this actually where my treatment will take place? Because I think we get quite a lot of calls from patients who say, but I didn't understand that my treatment wasn't taking place there. I thought it was a clinic. So it's really hard to navigate these kind of new types of medical services. But I'd say for patients, it's always just worth checking, is this where my treatment is taking place? Is this an HFEA licensed clinic? And finding out that information, certainly before treatment any starts and before any payments are made, if that's relevant.
Would you have less protection if you're not being treated in an HFEA registered and licensed clinic?
Well, only HFEA licensed clinics need to abide by the laws and the guidance that we set out. Now, you can't offer, for example, an embryo transfer outside of an HFEA licensed clinic, so that would be illegal. And I don't think, I haven't got any evidence to say that's happening outside of a licensed clinic. But it does mean that we have no way of acting. So if there is a clinic, like an online service that goes bust, if you like, because we saw unfortunately end of last year, those patients were registered with that online service and not with an HFEA licensed clinic. And although we can't do anything about financial compensation anyway, if a clinic goes bust or needs to close for whatever reason, and it's an HFEA licensed clinic, then that clinic still must abide by the law. So it needs to ensure that any embryos or eggs or sperm in storage are held safely and securely, that patient records are kept safely and securely, that patients are aware of what's going on and have time to make decisions about their treatment and what they want to do. And only when we've assured ourselves that all of those things have taken place would we agree that a centre clinic can close. And that does happen. Sometimes clinics do close. So I think patients do have, not necessarily financially, but for all of the other parts of their treatment, they would have a more secure future in a licensed clinic should it close for whatever reason.
And what about people who go abroad? We know that's increasingly common, but do people have any protection if they have treatment abroad? Is there something like the HFEA everywhere else?
Well, I mean, it really varies for every country. So, we can only enforce UK law in the UK. And, we have some information on our website that says, it might be attractive, but there's financial reasons for others to go abroad, but we can't guarantee, the safety and effectiveness of any treatment that takes place outside of the UK. And I'd also urge people, particularly if they're thinking of donor treatment abroad, that different rules apply. So, for example, in the UK, if you have a treatment using a donor, whether it's an egg donor or a sperm donor, when your child turns 18, should they want to, they can apply to the HFEA and find out the name and other details of the donor. In other countries, that doesn't apply. So it may be that you may have donor treatment abroad and come back to the UK, and then in years to come, realize that that information is not available to you. So there's lots of things to think about if you are having treatment abroad. And unfortunately, the HFEA doesn't cover that.
With licensed clinics, does the HFEA have any powers at all over the cost of treatment?
So no, we don't, is the short answer. So the HFEA has no powers over who can access NHS funding or the cost of treatment. I think, though, within that, there is some guidance and there's things we look at on inspection again. So before treatment starts, every individual patient should have an individual costed treatment plan. So not just the information about price that might be available on a clinic's website, but also detailed for me, my specific circumstances, this is how much the treatment would cost. So that's something all clinics must provide, but we don't have any say about how much they charge. We did work with some other regulators in the last few years where we have kind of very old-fashioned powers and can't do anything about this. We worked with a big regulator, the Competition and Markets Authority, and they did some work a few years ago about how clinics must explain pricing very transparently to patients, must ensure that patients have that information before starting treatment. And they provided some guidance for clinics to follow, and they checked whether clinics were following that guidance, and they really made a difference to how clinics are talking about the cost of treatment. But they also, if people Google CMA fertility, they can find a short video for patients and a longer guide that sort of says, if you're paying for treatment, these are some specific questions you might want to ask before signing any contracts.
When people have treatment here, there's a thing added onto the cost called the HFEA fee. So what's that actually covering?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And, what I think it's really important to know is the HFEA would never charge patients for their treatment. This is a charge that all regulators have, where the people who they license or they regulate pay to be covered by the services. It's the same in every organization that's regulated. And, it really frustrates me, really, that if I see a bill that a patient's paid, it doesn't say, here's my fee towards electricity, here's my fee towards water. Those are all things that are included in the cost of treatment, and we would never charge patients a fee. So it is very confusing for people. I understand that it says HFEA fee. At the moment, that fee was set, the way the fees worked was set a long time ago, where it is per IVF cycle. And something we're looking at is whether that's still the best way for licensed clinics to be paying towards the cost of regulation. Modern regulators now do that costing in several different ways, and that's something we're looking at over the next year or two. But just to repeat what I said, the HFEA would never charge patients for the services, and the service we provide is there to support patients.
You do also provide some things directly to patients. I suppose I'm thinking about things like information and choose a fertility clinic. And I wondered if you could just explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So we have a lot of information available. Sometimes as I get lost in our website, I almost think too much. So we provide lots of information at the outset of treatment. We provide information about different types of treatment. But by law, all clinics need to submit data to us. So they submit data on the treatments and outcomes that they're doing in the clinic. And that's something that's set out in the law. So we've held a register of fertility treatment and outcomes going back since 1991. We think it's the oldest running in the world. And that, for people who want to do research on, what's happening with treatment and outcomes, is a hugely rich resource, and we get interest from all around the world. But in terms of what we can provide for the public, we do that in a variety of ways. So we have a dashboard on our website where people can look at data going back to 1991, and they can filter it, whether they're in a same-sex couple or they're a single patient or they live in Scotland or in England. And that's looking at, again, it's not a predictive tool of success, but it's looking at kind of what's happened to people in these age or other family types or brackets. But the other part of our website that's the most used part of our website, we have hundreds of thousands of people using it every year, is the Choose a Fertility Clinic side of our website. And I'd say for anyone looking at treatment, that would be a good place to start. So that has a list alphabetically or by postcode, depending how you want to search, of all HFEA licensed clinics in the country. And on there, as I said briefly before, you have an inspector rating, and you can look at all the inspection reports. So we don't take anything out. This is, what inspectors found. It talks about whether the labs were good, whether their consent process makes sense, what sort of counselling they had, have there been any incidents. That's all there. It's got a patient rating, a kind of friends and family test. And for anyone watching, I'd say, this probably won't take any more than 3 to 5 minutes. I always say there's lots of other ways you can kind of give feedback to your clinic, not only through their own feedback forms, through Google reviews or Trustmark or whatever. That's great. But this is the only feedback that goes directly to our inspectors. So any free text comments that someone might put, whether it's complimentary, the reception staff were fantastic, or it's, I really can't recommend this clinic because, this situation happened. The inspectors read that, they review it every month, and before an inspection, they would review all those comments. And if there's any areas of concern, they would bring that up directly in the clinic. Equally, if there's kind of compliments, they would also, they say, we've had really positive feedback. We think that your reception staff particularly are fantastic. So I'd really encourage, it takes 5 minutes, and that's the only source of information that inspectors will look at in advance directly from patients. So I'd really encourage anyone to feedback on that. And then the last part of that Choose a Fertility Clinic part of our website has a lot of data in terms of success rates. So this looks at each clinic, and you can look at the success rates by each clinic. Now, I know as a patient, success rates are, absolutely the thing that people want to look at. Although our most recent survey still says location and cost actually play a bigger factor than success rates in choosing a clinic. But understandably, that's very much a focus for patients. We'd always say that for most patients, success rates don't vary that much between, clinic A and clinic B. And there's no perfect clinic that exists. There's only the one for you. So what's your neighbor or your best friend? They may have had a successful outcome at a clinic. That doesn't mean it feels like it's the right one for you. So we'd always say, success rates need to be looked at in the round. So we have for several years now that register of information. It used to be that clinics would send us things by post, and people would type it in. Now we have moved to sort of a system where clinics can directly input that data with us, but that's taken a few years, and clinics have had to check hundreds of thousands of records to make sure they're all accurate. That's now in its last stages. So we've just been able to update on over 90% of clinics now have the first page of data is up to date up to 22, 23, so births for 2022 and pregnancies for 2023. So anyone in the public can look at that and see what's happening at different clinics. And then towards the end of 2025, there's also some detailed statistics which are perhaps a bit less looked at than that front page, and the detailed statistics you can break down by different treatment types. And that's going to be all updated by the end of 2025. So it's been, a really big project, but we're sort of, the end is in sight. And again, I'd encourage anyone interested in looking at clinics to have a look through that data. There's lots of words on there which are important, but you can see the numbers there and you can see how things might vary from one clinic to another.
Finally, I wondered if you could just tell us a bit about what kind of projects the HFEA is working on at the moment.
Well, I'd say the biggest project is getting all this data finally up to date, before the end of 2025. That's a really big area of concern for us that it has been so out of date. We really want to get those last bits done. I think, as I said before, we've been talking for a while about how our law is very out of date. We have very little powers to deal with some of the things that are taking place, and particularly some of those new types of clinics or online clinics that we're talking about. So, we've made recommendations to the government a couple of years ago, and it is for the government and ultimately Parliament to change the law, but that remains a real priority for us. And I guess sort of third and other areas remain an absolute priority for us. So inspecting and licensing and making sure that clinics have the highest standards possible. And then as those 18-year-olds that I talked about before, the children born from donation who know they're donor conceived, the law changed that the first of those who turned 18 at the end of 2023 are now able to apply for information. And we've changed our IT systems, we've got more staff, and now we're really hoping to turn things around for anyone applying for that information as quickly as possible, because obviously it's important and potentially life-changing information. And we know that waiting for that can be really difficult. So that continues to be a real area of focus for us.
Clare Ettinghausen, thank you so much for explaining so clearly what the HFEA does and what it's all about and how it's relevant to patients. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.